Welcome to the Propreneur Podcast, where we help practice owners become better entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Dino Watt. And once again, welcome everybody to the Propreneur Podcast. Excited to have you here again today, as we always do, bring you the best practices possible for you and your practice. There's sometimes where I'm bringing you special, even more special guests than are just in our silo of the orthodontic or dental space. I'll bring in the authors or the experts from outside of our space so you can learn from their expertise. And I know as a community, we have often talked about reference to the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I've recommended everybody go to watch the actual mastermind. And today we have a very special treat because we have one of Chris's business partners, also a negotiator, who has so much to teach us and share with us. That today we have Derek Gaunt on, who is the author of Ego, Authority, Failure. And if you are driving home right now, I'm going to suggest you actually pause right now so that you can get home and sit down and take notes for this conversation, because I gotta tell you, I've read through the book 1.5 times now, and I haven't told Derek that yet, but 1.5 times I've gone through the book, I've taken notes, I've been able to implement a few of the things already, and I know you're going to want to do that too. So before we get started with that, Derek, I just want to say thank you again for being a part of our show, and welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. You know, anytime that we can on this show get people who are true experts in their field and can give our doctors a different perspective than what the jar they're sitting in every single day, it's a pleasure. And I always start the show off by asking people what's their story. And so if you can, in a kind of succinct manner, tell us how you got started in this world of negotiation. Something you always wanted to do? Did you fall into it? Tell us that.
Yeah. So I started my career in law enforcement in '88. And I started like everybody else starts. I was pushing a patrol car up and down the street. But at the time, there was the scourge of crack cocaine was in its heyday. And so we, as a community, law enforcement community, we knew we had to take very aggressive steps in order to curb not only the selling of the drug, but the violence that was associated with it. So 18 months, I pushed a patrol car up and down the street, and then I applied for a street-level narcotics enforcement unit. Plainclothes, we were in beat-up old cars, and we would jump out on drug dealers and drug buyers, and
wow.
Then we would have to interview them. And I learned through trial and error and some training that I could say specific things in a specific manner to elicit a specific response from the person that I was dealing with. And of course, once I figured out I could do that, I wanted to take it to the next level. So I became a detective, and now I'm doing this on a regular basis. And I knew that there was another level, and that level was hostage negotiation. So in '97, I applied for a spot on the team. 2001, I got promoted to sergeant, took over team leadership responsibilities. 2004, got promoted to the rank of lieutenant. I took over command of the team, and that's the spot that I remained in up until I actually left in 2014. So I've spent the better part of my adult life using my interpersonal communication skills to influence the behavior of other people. And, Chris and I met when he was still with the Bureau in 2001. We became fast friends because we were obviously in the same discipline. So when he left the Bureau in 2007, 2008, 2009, he called me up and said, I got this wacky idea, and I'd like you to come along for the ride. And we haven't looked back. Well,
one of the things that's fascinating about that is it sounds like every time you up the level from being even just pushing the car, driving the patrol car. So my father was a police officer. My brother is in corrections. My other brother is the federal probation officer for the state of Utah. All my family is law enforcement. So first of all, thank you so much for your service and for being willing to do that, especially in today's environment, right? It's not, it's super hostile. It's sad. And I just hats off to you for doing that. You're with the Black Swan. I'm the black sheep of the family. I didn't go into law enforcement. So what I was going to say is that it seems like every time you up the level of intensity and seriousness also gets leveled up. I mean, when you're talking hostage negotiation, It's literally people's lives. So you got to have some confidence in your ability to have a conversation with somebody.
You got to have confidence in your training as well.
Yeah.
You got to. One of my mentors, that was his mantra: stick to your training. Your training is not going to fail you.
Wow.
Even if you're struggling with execution, your training will not fail you. Just stick to your training. That was a great takeaway from him. I kept it at the forefront of my mind every time that I went out, and it takes the pressure off of me, because I've got a template. I've got options that I can choose from. Recognize which ones are important for what situation is the challenge.
Well, that's really fascinating. I told you before in the pre-show that sometimes I'll just ask questions based upon where I think the person listening is going to want to listen. That's very fascinating, because as we're going to go through some of the stuff that you talk about in the book, there are specific ways to have that conversation where we're talking about, whether you're doing an accusation audits or mirroring and labeling. And I talk about this with my clients when it comes to having crucial conversations, even with their team members, right? Because there's a hostage situation going on there, right? In some way, shape, or form. And sometimes it's really hard for them to go back to the default, to do that, oh, this isn't working, I'm going to switch out to this, or I don't really trust that thing is working. How did you get yourself conditioned to really believing this stuff? Because some of the stuff that you talk about, and I'm sure some of the stuff you were taught, doesn't, quote, seem natural, although it's effective.
Well, the first thing you have to do is you got to get your repetitions in. You're learning a foreign language. This is a foreign language. The people within your community, they have been doing what they've been doing for decades. They've been talking the way they've been talking for decades. And what we espouse at the Black Swan Group is that you modify it, you change it. So you're learning that foreign language. And those of you who have learned a language other than your native tongue, think about those first days.
Yeah, it's true.
And how difficult it was. And so that's the biggest challenge, is sticking to your guns as far as repetition is concerned. You don't have to be negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal to get the skill work in.
Right.
I want you to go and use the skills at Starbucks when you're ordering your coffee. I want you to go use the skills with the person located in the at the supermarket checking you out. That's where you get your repetition in. That's where you get your practice, and that's where your confidence level starts to rise.
Yeah.
And you become more efficient. And the more efficient you become, the more confidence you get, and it just starts to feed on itself.
Well, I got to tell you, that's been the fun part. It's actually been fun. You talk about in the book even about the different types of repetition, like don't expect to be successful the first time or third time or 13th time, right? You have to put those reps in, like you said. But it's actually been some fun stuff. Getting to know answers instead of yes is something I'm doing all the time. And it's so cool because you have this little smirk. I have a little smirk in the back of my head when somebody goes, well, no, that'd be fine. It's like, oh, it totally worked. Just to be able to use that. It's really good stuff.
It's like seeing a unicorn for the first time.
Yeah.
Chris and I said, hey, if you look behind that tree over there, there's a unicorn, and you go over and you look behind the tree, i.e. use the skill, and you see the unicorn, you can't wait to see it again.
Yeah, it's totally true.
I'm continually amazed at what people will agree to by saying no.
Yeah,
that they wouldn't otherwise do it.
Okay, so I told you before, I have so many questions, and then I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this. Let's get back to a couple of things I want to ask. I actually want to go a little bit from the back of the book to the beginning. Okay. But before I get to that first one, because I want to talk about the 5 levels of listening, which is something I think is really important for, I mean, you talk about it, it's I think in one of the last chapters of the book, and yet it's really important for, I think, so many people to think about when it comes to communication. But before we get to that, I want to ask you an important question for you, hopefully, that we can kind of get a little insight into your brain. Why this book? Why now?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence in leadership is not a new concept or idea. It's been written about ad nauseum over the past 40 years or so. And there's very little material out there that goes beyond the generic. Create a collaborative environment. Be nicer to your direct reports. Be transparent, be open, be honest. Show some empathy. All of those are touted as being crucial, and they are, for leadership success, but nobody or very few people have told you how to do it.
Yeah.
How do you demonstrate that level of empathy? How do you show that level of transparency? How do you build rapport, establish trust-based influence, and then ultimately get them to do what you ask them to do, not because you said so, but because they're willing?
Yeah.
And so that was the motivation behind this. I wanted to take a look at what makes a good leader effective, what makes a bad leader toxic, and show what both sides of that coin look like, and then provide some actionable skills that you can use to put you in the camp of the former.
And I got to tell you, for me, that's one of the reasons why both of these books, your book, like I said, 1.5 times going through it, because and I'll finish the second time through, but it's because it really, I study a lot of human behavior. I like to help my doctors be able to communicate better with their team members and lead better. And to be able to go to them and not just say, like you said, kind of almost a superlative of like, be nicer, be kinder. It's like, no, this is exactly how you do it. Because like when you talk about, there's a huge difference between having empathy and having tactical empathy.
Yes.
And that's powerful stuff there. So I love it. When we talk about ego, authority, and failure, one of the things that I really appreciated in the book is you say a few times that it's important in your leadership position to have an ego, to have authority, but it's actually it kind of sometimes becomes this tipping point when you talk about the examples of whether it be in the military or in the negotiation world, that it tips over to the toxicity, the failure part. So let's talk about that toxic leadership and how you see that tip over so often.
It tips over because ego and authority are intoxicating. They're seductive and they feed off of one another. And it tips over when people lose sight that they have a responsibility for those under their charge. And they being the leader, want respect, and they fail to realize that a prerequisite to you getting that respect is showing that respect.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people to get their minds around the concept that it's not about you. Yes, you have to be authoritative at times. Yes, you have to make split-second decisions without input from your direct reports. Yes, when the enemy is inside the wire and you're passing out the last rounds of ammunition, your ego and authority should be front and center. The problem with that is the enemy isn't always inside the wire, and you're not always passing out the last rounds of ammunition, and the toxic leader can't differentiate between the two. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Some may have been promoted too quickly. Some may have seen that as a style that they wanted to emulate, and it becomes a systemic problem within the organization because they think that's how people get ahead. There are a variety of reasons, but the bottom line is they're more focused on their professional survival and reputation than they are about the people who report to them.
I love that. And I when I was reading this, I'm thinking of a ton of our doctors, most of our doctors, they really are wanting to serve the people of their patients, right? To straighten their teeth or to correct their bite or whatever. That sometimes I have this training that I do around relationships, that the most important relationship is the one with yourself, because you can't give from an empty cup. But then I'll often ask, so who's the second most important relationship in your business? And they'll typically say the patients, because the patients have the money. And I'll say, well, actually, the second most important patient is your team. Because if you can't count on your team to do it, if they don't count on you, if they don't trust you, then they're not going to treat your patients as well as you want them to. You take care of the team and they'll take care of the patients. So in the same idea here, with this ego, it is important to know who you are and that you're capable of doing what you do. And yet you have to be able to lean on those team members as well. So let's talk about the 5 levels of listening real fast, because I thought this was really a fascinating piece to kind of tie it all in together towards the end of your book. That I use this saying often: are you listening to understand, or are you listening to respond? This takes that to a whole nother level.
Right. So The 5 levels, generally speaking, are intermittent listening. That's at the bottom level. Rebuttal listening is the second level. Logic is the next level. Emotion and logic, and then listening at an empathetic level. That's the deepest level of listening. That's where you need to be in order to demonstrate to the other side that you get their perspective, that you understand the lay of the land as they see it. I don't care who it is. It's a patient. It's a vendor. It's one of your direct reports. It's a colleague. It's your spouse. People want other people to understand how they feel, what they're going through, what their circumstances are. It's the cheapest and most effective concession that you can make one person to another. Empathetic listening is very difficult to do. It takes total focus. Cognitively, you're burning energy when you're in that state, which is why most of us don't do it, right? Most of us operate around levels 1 and 2, intermittent listening and rebuttal listening throughout the course of the day. It's easier to do. Intermittent listening, where you're listening long enough to get the gist of what the other person's saying, and then you refocus on your own internal monologue. Or rebuttal listening, where you're listening long enough until they say something you can argue with, and now you just want them to shut up long enough so you can jump into the conversation to tell them how dumb you are. That's where most of us do our dancing. Listening at an empathetic level is understanding meaning, worldview, symbolism, why it's important to them. Takes a lot of energy. It's exhausting. The key is not to operate at that level 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you can't do it. The key is to be able to operate that level when the conversation is of import. When you know that there are negatives espoused by the person on the other side, that's when you need to get into that deeper level of listening. And so those are the 5 levels. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I loved about that, and I think even what you're saying here, is I talk often about being present with people, like really being present, letting people have their presence. And level 5, you're like, if you're really doing it right, like you said, it's exhausting because you are being just incredibly present with that person, letting them know that not only you're listening, not only that you're trying to internalize what they're talking about to really understand them, but I also think it helps you understand kind of your whole team, like showing them that you are having that empathy to everybody. And I'm going to venture to guess that the people who are leading based on 1 and 2 are the people who, this is again another part of your book, are the people who miss the blue flamers more than catch them because they're not paying attention.
Yeah. And you'll find often that blue flamers have been sycophants to the people who are making decisions about promotions anyway.
Right.
And so that's what I meant by this systemic feeding of itself. Once you create that environment, that's how everybody thinks you're supposed to get by. And so John Doe promotes Billy because Billy has always been there for John Doe, and saying that John Doe's all his decisions are great. And so Billy now becomes a boss before his time, and he starts to look down line and look for other people that are going to be sycophants for him. And those are the people that are usually promoted. But the blue flamers are always going to be problematic. And you're right. When they're listening, when the decision makers are listening at levels 1 and 2, they've missed it. Blue flamers don't come out of it nowhere.
Right.
There are telltale signs all over the place if we choose to slow down and take a look.
So do you think sometimes, so just to define this, and I'll define it in my way, and please correct me, is that for those that are listening that might not have read the book yet, the blue flamers are the kind of people that get promoted maybe too soon or aren't ready for it. And they're doing it because to reference another book, they're trying to be, or they're looking to be runners, but they're really joggers, right? They're putting on a good show, but they might not have the depth of information, the depth of skill level in order to do it. But because they're putting on the show, they're getting promoted. Was that pretty clear? Is that right?
Yeah. That's the blue flamer analogy comes from the rocket taking off the launch pad. The flame coming out of the back end of it is blue because it's trying to haul tail and get into orbit as quickly as possible. And those people who get promoted rapidly within their organizations, I refer to as blue flamers. And by and large, they don't spend a lot of time at one level before getting promoted to the next. And so there comes a lack of institutional and environmental acumen. And so they know that they're viewed as being inexperienced. They know that they're viewed as being a favorite child within the organization.
Yeah.
And so they tend to make up for it with a heavy-handed management style, because they know that there are people that are looking at them going, she doesn't have the experience. He didn't put his time in. I've been here for 20 years and you're going to come in here after being here for 5 years and tell me that I should be doing X, Y, and Z. And so right off the bat, while I appreciate ambition, they're doing themselves a disservice. And not only are they doing themselves a disservice, the people who are making the decisions to elevate them are doing the organization a disservice.
It's interesting. I didn't think about this until you were just saying that, but based upon that analogy and that process, it almost seems like the authority that they're given, it actually creates the toxic ego. Not that they had the ego first, like they're doing that whole pressing through, using the blue flaming, trying to get as fast as they possibly can up the ladder. But because other people are allowing it, because the toxic leadership ahead of them is allowing it, that authority that they're given creates the toxic ego, and therefore it gets even bigger. And then there's your failures. I guess I was thinking of it before is that it goes ego first, the authority second, then failure. But really it can be when people get authority and it's not earned, it's not respected by themselves, not just the people around them, then that can become a ego as a defensive mechanism and then create that failure.
Right. That's right. That's right. Because at the end of the day, when somebody challenges your station in life, what does that do for you?
Yeah.
I don't care who you are and what you do. When somebody challenges your station in life, you get defensive. When you are defensive, boom, negative emotions are now in your brain. And you're going to do, we've got that bundle of nerves at the base of our brain, the amygdala. That's 75% of the real estate is geared towards threats and negatives. Now that thing has been activated. And so what do we do when it's activated? The one or two responses. We either fight or we run.
Yep.
And so when you're the boss, you can't run. So what are you going to do? You're going to fight. And in a figurative way, you're going to fight, which means lashing out, which means do it because I said so. How dare you question my authority? All of that starts to come into play. Why? Because you felt threatened that someone had the audacity to suggest we might be able to do this another way.
So let me ask you a question then. As I'm thinking about that, like the do it because I said so. I remember as a dad, right? I don't know if you have any children.
Yep.
I remember doing that as a kid, as a young dad, right? Like, do it because I said so. And even my kids were like, "That's not a good enough reason," right? And I'm trying to press that authority, right, and that ego there. Right now in our environment, I'd just like to get your opinion on this, especially with what we were kind of touching on earlier with what's happening within law enforcement, right? There's that, it almost feels like it can be a generational staff infection, if you will, right? Throughout our I call it staff infections inside of my businesses because I don't like calling people staffs. Nobody wants this to be a staff. It's an infection nobody wants, right? So we're team members. And so every once in a while, though, you do get a staff infection. And sometimes that staff infection can actually bleed throughout and actually go up to upper management. So how much of some of the challenges and many challenges maybe that you've faced, especially in the business world, leadership world, come from a generational ego, authority, failure problem, as opposed to, it just sprouted up out of nowhere. I didn't really see this coming, right? The next generation behind them. My point is, are they being led to do that because they're told that's a better way to do it and that's what they're seeing? Or is it just because they happen to, get through the ranks?
Well, I think whatever's coming up generationally behind you, there are telltale signs all over the place. We know it's coming. The problem is we fail to acknowledge it. We fail to articulate it. We recognize it all of the time. And then this goes back to our use of tactical empathy. Our use of tactical empathy is to always find the motivation behind the behavior and to go on a deeper level, a deeper dive to find out what's pushing the decision, what's pushing the behavior, what's pushing the statement. Well, the same thing can be said about people's view of leadership from generation to generation. We all know what that next generation of leader is going to look like because we raised them, right? And if we just pay attention, they're screaming what's important to them, what they value. Because at the end of the day, I don't care who you are, you got to get your head around what's important to the next generation.
Right.
What do they value? There are people right now that I talk to on a regular basis that say, I hate dealing with millennials. Oh, why?
Mm-hmm.
They've got wants, desires, and needs just like everybody else.
That's right.
And the effectiveness of a leader is found in their ability to pivot, their ability to be flexible in the moment. And the days of us being able to say, because I said so, are gone.
Yeah, for sure.
These generations coming up behind us, they've had everything explained to them. So they're not going to get to adulthood and all of a sudden don't need any explanation. They need to understand, why are you moving the water cooler from that point in the office, that point in the office to that point in the office? That's what's important to them. And we knew that all along. And so rarely does anything or should anything surprise us, because if we just slow down and pay attention, the writing is pretty much on the wall.
Well, speaking of surprises, then how often are you surprised when you go into, because you, with the Black Swan Group, you guys are training leaders, CEOs from highest level companies all over the country, all over the world, really. What still surprises you when you're talking to a leader that they do something you're like, really? Like, that seems almost basic, or is there anything that really surprises you?
I'm surprised at how many shouting matches occur.
Really?
In the corporate world. I'm surprised at how downright rude some of them can be. That's surprising to me. And I've heard it from the tech sector. I've heard it from healthcare. I've heard it from travel and leisure. I hear it all the time. So that's really what surprises me. You guys in the corporate world yell at each other more than hostage takers and hostage negotiators do.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, right? Because you can't do that. You can't have that type of flare up, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And here's an interesting anecdotal story. We're always looking for new black swans to round out our training cadre, and we approached a guy who used to be an FBI agent. He now works in the kidnap and ransom business for an insurance company, and we talked about who we were and what we did. And he had previous hostage and kidnap negotiations experience, and we invited him to come check us out and possibly join our team. And he said, I don't think I want to do that. My brother-in-law works for a large tech company who shall remain nameless. And he talks to me about the negotiations that he gets into and how they try to manipulate and beat down the other side. And we use aggressive tactics on the other side. And he goes, it's a slimy world. And I don't want to get involved with perpetuating that slimy world of corporate negotiations. I'd rather do what I'm doing, which is, now get your head around this, Dino. This is what he's telling us. He's telling us, I would rather deal with a sociopath who has a hostage tied to a tree in the jungle on a sat phone than I would in the corporate
CEO
world.
of a company.
Volume. Yeah.
Wow, that does. So could you, can you empathize with that? Did you agree with that? Like, yeah, I could say it's kind of crazy. Like, have you been in that many crazy situations like that?
In talking, I haven't been, for lack of a better term, mediating any type of internal dispute like that. But I have heard from people who are suffering under that scourge that this goes on. It's not the exception. It's pretty much the rule.
Wow, that's interesting. That is so interesting that it's that toxic and crazy that way. Well, okay, so speaking of communication, one of the areas that I wanted to focus on when I was going through the book, and I wanted to make sure I pull out is, I have a lot of conversations with my doctors about how to say something, what to say, how to communicate better with their team members, how to get their point across, maybe even if they don't have a lot of time to sit down and have long conversations with them, but that it comes across in a way that the team gets enrolled into the same idea of them, and that they're going to, maybe they have to work a couple longer hours, especially after COVID just happened or anything like that. But one of the challenges is that they don't do a really good job with setting up the conversation. I always say that the best conversations are in the setup, right? How you set up that conversation. When I walk into my wife and she's doing something and I just start talking to her and she's in the middle of something, it's probably not going to go well because I'm interrupting her life. But when I come in and say, hey, do you have a quick moment for me to ask you a few questions? And she can say yes or no, then we can actually have a conversation. We're setting up that conversation for success. In the book, you talk about the importance of, especially when it comes to critical or crucial or maybe critical or crucial conversations, employee reviews, bad news that has to be delivered. You talk about denying the negative, not deny the negative. That's what I should have said. Yes. So explain a little bit about that and how that helps set up the conversation for at least possible success.
Well, denying of a negative is actually what is going to reinforce the negative. When you say a denial of the negative is, if I were to say, Dino, I got to share something with you. I don't want you to think I'm being a jerk. What's going to follow that sentence?
I'm totally, whatever you say, I'm thinking, okay, you're going to tell me a jerk about this thing.
Yeah, you're going to totally be a jerk about this thing. That's what's called denying the negative.
Right.
So 2 millimeter shift, instead of saying, I don't want you to think I'm being a jerk, the 2 millimeter shift is, you're going to think that I'm being a jerk. You see what I dropped off of there? I dropped off the I don't want. So the focus is not on me anymore.
Okay, so Derek, why this was a big so there are certain things in the book that I went, oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong for all these years, right? And it was what I was taught. So I mentioned there's a book, Crucial Conversations. There's a book, Critical Conversations, same type of idea. And the pattern for that, as you were talking about, the repetitions that I had learned from that and I've been teaching is, hey, I don't want you to think this. I don't want you to think that I don't see the hard work that you're putting in, and I don't want to think that, because it's taking away the negative. But just that little shift in the way that you said that, of instead of I don't want you to think, and turning it to, you're going to think that I don't see this. You're going to think that. Yep. It was huge for me. Like, I seriously, in the car, I was driving from Arizona to California, or to Utah, and I literally had to rewind it a couple of times. Like, listen, and I woke up my wife basically, and she didn't care. But I thought it was exciting. So I thought I'd tell her anyway. That's so crucial.
Yeah, it's a small thing, but in all of the use of these skills during the course of a tough conversation, we're looking for their incremental effect. Not one of these skills is not the one swing of the axe that's going to bring the tree down. Think of it in terms of regular negotiations are like Mike Tyson. One round knockout. We're looking for the big punch. Black Swan negotiation, it's more like Floyd Mayweather. We're going to go all 15 rounds. Yeah. I'm going to bob and weave and just outpoint you, because that's what I do. So that's, in using the Black Swan method, we're looking for the cumulative effect of all of the skills. So things like you just said, not denying the negative and changing that denial into a preemptive label is just one of many techniques that you would use throughout the entire conversation in order to move the needle in the direction that you want it to go.
Yeah, and it's great. Seriously, it's one of those things that now I'm going to start using on my repetitions again to change that, because the pattern in my head is, I don't want you to think. And here's, again, just that one thing that for me was really awesome was I try to create, even in my copywriting, even in if I'm writing a template or a speech or a script for someone, really try to take out the I's as much as possible. So that's not about me, right? I don't want you to think that. And that was actually one of the things that in my head kind of twisted a little bit, was realizing that it's okay to say, you're probably going to, you might think this. It's most likely that. to actually put it back on them, to let them know it really is about them and you care about them. And so that's why you're bringing it out at the very beginning. I mean, the conversation you had about getting the money from the, it wasn't the FBI, it was the SWAT team. From the SWAT team to bring that, speaker in. It was just, I almost wanted to go back and like write the script out, because it's masterful of using all of the things we're going to talk about in just a moment as well. But starting off with that, you're probably going to think this and you probably feel like that. And I think there's a lot of people like that. I can do that in your home, right? With your family, with your kids sitting down. Yeah. I know you guys are going to be totally upset about the fact that we're not going to Disneyland this year because of COVID. And like, to be able to start with that is so powerful.
And the biggest value, I think, or one of the biggest values, is it makes you look like a mind reader.
Oh yeah.
Because you're saying what they probably are thinking, feeling, and they haven't spoken it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, the first thought in their mind is, how dialed in is this guy?
Yeah.
That he's picking up on this and I haven't said anything yet. And the other thing is, the other big value for this preemptive style of labeling, otherwise known as the accusations audit, is delivered correctly. You can send them to the far end of the fear spectrum, and it makes anything that you're going to say subsequent to that a relief.
Yeah. I actually just did that in a couple of emails today. I love that piece about like making it bigger. So it's like, it's not that big deal. It's okay. They have that. Well, here's the thing. It combines so many things, because we just talked about a moment ago being empathetic, like letting people feel that you have empathy. What else could they think but, wow, this person really is trying to, at least, or they do get me. That's empathy.
Right. That's right. And with the use of empathy, it does a lot for you, but probably the most significant thing that it does for you is that it encourages reciprocity.
Yes.
Because you gave it first, you can call it in later.
We were just talking about this on one of my mastermind groups the other day about, I'm a huge Robert Cialdini fan, and the idea of that law of reciprocity, right? That sometimes we think of it as a physical thing, right? I'm going to give you this physical thing, so therefore you feel that. But oftentimes it can be just that mental thing, that I gave you space, I gave you freedom, I gave you empathy. You're going to want to give that back to me.
Exactly right.
Love it.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I'm telling you, I really enjoyed this. Like, I really had a great time. And I hope you had a good time, like, writing it. And I know I've written 4 books, and I know how much you put into writing books, but you just really did a great job. So the next section we go into really spoke to me, because I actually have a certification in body language reading and conversation. And when you went into that whole conversation around the words, tone, and body language, it just put it all together for me. And I was actually, after reading Never Split the Difference, I was kind of trying to weave that conversation into a lot of the things around labeling and mirroring and the accusations audits and tactical empathy and all that stuff. And you put it all together in just that, like, I think it's 3 different chapters right there in those 3 little sections. That was great. So let's talk about real fast where people get it wrong when it comes to communication and negotiation, if you will, in those 3 areas: their words, their tone, and their body language. Or I loved how you called it kinesthetic.
Well, they fail to realize how much data you get out of facial expressions and body language. And the reality is, you get more out of facial expressions, body language, and the tone of voice of the other person than you do from the content of what they're actually saying. What you say is not as important. In fact, how you say it is 5 times more important than what is said. So where people get it wrong is, their outer voice will betray their inner voice. If they are not calm, if they're not at peace with what they're about to share, it's going to get betrayed in their outer voice. Your tone, your voice is your number 1 tool. I mean, we can take all of the Black Swan skills and I can give them to you and say, go out and conquer. And if your tone and your delivery stinks, you're going to fall right on your face. because your voice will cause an emotional reaction on the part of the person receiving the message. That's the bad news. The good news is you control whether that emotional response is negative or positive, just based on your tone, your delivery, your cadence, your projected sincerity, your genuineness. People can see through that. They can see through that, and they know when it's coming from a good place, and they know when you're trying to manipulate. So you want to make sure that, what's coming out of your mouth is congruent with what your body is saying. I always love watching the interview where the person goes, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I totally love it.
Right,
No, yeah, you can totally come over.
Yeah. I'd love to have you over. And
there's a
for
great
a fact.
we talk about shoulders a lot because shoulders give away a lot of uncertainty, right? And there's a great interview of O.J. Simpson, right? He was going to do a podcast or something, and he's like, "I'm going to tell you everything you wanted to know," and it's just like, no, you're not. Like, you can totally see exactly that. So let me ask you. Yeah, I got nothing to hide. When it comes to that, how much does it? This is on kind of almost on a personal level, but it weaves into what I try to teach with my doctors so often is when you call into a place and you know that person on the other end of the line, like all you have is their tone and their words, right? You don't get to see their body. How much does it drive you crazy when you can just tell that person's either reading a script or just going through the motions or filling in the blanks for the questions that they're asking you? Do you ever do anything about it?
Good question. The script reading is it's usually evident within the first 3 to 4 words. You
Right.
can tell your intuition is going crazy, and the problem with sounding rote, rehearsed, or robotic is you fail to make the connection. You fail to make the other person like you. And people are 6 times more likely to do business with someone they like based on no other criteria whatsoever. Yeah. And it starts with your tone and your ability to connect. And if that is hindered at the beginning of the conversation, you're toast. You're toast. You're never going to recover from that. And so I can pick it up right away. So the cautionary tale to those of you who are listening is what I said earlier: transparent, projected sincerity, genuineness. They want to hear you speak from here as opposed to your brain, from the heart as opposed to the brain.
I often tell my doctors that the challenge is, so I call their phone receptionist, whoever, I use the word director of first impressions, because they're the ones who are in charge of the impression of that entire office. And when that person comes into the office, they might not even see that person, right? They're going to the salesperson, the treatment coordinator, the doctor. So you better have somebody there who is creating the first impression that you want them to create. So having the right tone, the volume, pitch, all that is so crucial. I kind of chuckled when you were talking about that, going, I know why this obviously obvious to you, but as you were saying that, I went, oh yeah, when you talked about repetitions earlier, right? Getting the repetitions in to learn how to use that stuff. But when you are going out to a scene and there's a hostage situation happening, you have the tools in the toolbox, but you can't be scripted because they're going to pick up on that. You've got to be as genuine as possibly can, knowing, all right, they said this. Now I need to pull out my tool to do this. Here's some tactical empathy. Here's some that talk about thinking on your feet. That's fascinating to me. It's something I thought of when you said that.
Well, here's the thing: is at the end of the day, and this is what I told my team members when I was running the team. Sorry about that. I got a dog that's going crazy downstairs.
No worries.
At the end of the day, I would tell them, remember, you're in a conversation. Don't ever lose fact of that you're in a conversation. It's just 2 people chopping it up on the phone. And the skill execution will occur where it's natural for you. Mm-hmm. But first and foremost, just get on the phone and talk to him. Get on the phone and talk to her. And the skills, you'll be able to pull the skills out when they feel the most appropriate. And so keeping that in the forefront of your mind, when you're dealing with a vendor, or you're dealing with a patient, or you're dealing with a colleague, or you're dealing with your team members. Just remember you're having a conversation.
And if you rehearse it and you go through repetitions enough, like talk about, because one of the biggest challenges to get team members to do is role playing, right? Is to get out there. And my whole point is, if you do it enough, I promise you will then find it more natural as you're doing it in real life when that situation comes up. You do the repetitions to learn how to do things like labeling correctly, mirroring correctly, accusations, honest, tactical empathy, all of those things. Not that you're, like you said earlier, not that one thing is going to, topple over the entire conversation, but all those things in different situations, areas, knowing when you can pull them up is where you're going to have the most success.
Yeah, and when you're working with your team members, when it comes to role play, you know that they have a problem with it. You should be setting up each request with an accusations audit.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think that, I'm telling you, that's awesome. Let's talk. Let's finish up. We know we got to close up in just a few moments. Thank you again for your time. I mean, I'm telling you, it's like I'm talking to. I don't get starstruck very often. I used to work in Hollywood, and so I want to I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I don't care if any of my listeners like this a lot. I'm having a good time, so it's all that matters.
All right.
Here's my favorite. This is my favorite thing. Well, let me ask you this. Why is getting to know more important than yes? Because this is a mind freak for people. So I teach a lot of sales processes. I teach people how to do sales, and getting the idea that no, you have to get a whole bunch of trial yeses, or you have to get them to say yes, like you say in the book, 3 times. I mean, I started laughing 3 times so that they'll want to say yes, and then talk about body language part of it, right? Add the nod to it as you're talking so that they will want to say yes too. And I love your setup of this. So please explain to my listeners why you want them to say no more than you want them to say yes.
Simply put, yes is commitment. Yes is obligation. People don't like being obligated to something they haven't volunteered for. And you driving for a yes is involuntary. And people know, they feel it in their bones when you're pushing them for a yes. And they've been sold to before by people pushing for a yes. So they know that at the end of that rainbow is a trap. And saying yes encroaches on people's autonomy. When I call you on the phone and I say, hey, Dino, do you have a couple of minutes? It's clear that I want you to say yes. And what's happening in your brain is, A, what's a couple of minutes?
Yes.
B, if I have a couple of minutes, do I want to talk to you? C, if I have a couple of minutes and I want to talk to you, do I want to talk about what you want to talk about? All of those 3 in a second go through your brain.
Yep.
And even then, it gives you pause. It gives you pause just about saying yes, because you feel like now I'm painting you into a corner. People call them micro agreements. People call them tie downs.
Yep.
The fact that you call something a tie down should scream at you that this is not voluntary.
Right.
And so 2 millimeter shift, change any yes oriented question into a no oriented question. Are you, will you take this out of the contract? Get switched to, are you against removing this? Can I sit in that reserved section of the restaurant? Would it be a bad idea if we sat over there?
Is now a bad time?
Is now a bad time? Have you given up on?
Yes.
All of those are great no-oriented questions. And I'm continually amazed at what people will agree to by saying no that you know they wouldn't agree to by saying yes.
Yeah.
It just offers them a little bit more protection. And again, that's what we're trying to do. See it from their side.
My 2 favorite things, I actually think I wrote Chris about this, and after I read Never Split the Difference, is those we talked about earlier, the extremeness and then the getting to know, is that when I go to hotel rooms, I did this right after I got done reading the Never Split the Difference, is I called up and I said, okay, you're going to absolutely kill me when you hear me ask you this, or when I ask you this. And the girl literally said, she goes, oh no, what'd you do? Because they're thinking that extreme, right? And I said,
Yeah.
then I said, would you be opposed to a later checkout time than normal? And she goes, oh no, that's fine. And I said, what's the latest you can give me? And she gave me a 4 o'clock checkout time. Wow. Normally from 11 is normal. So I was sold right away. I think I put down the book and did it right after that. But I do it all the time now, that extremeness of it, and then going for the no. I probably have gotten too much in the habit of using would you be opposed to more than anything. Right? I need to do some more reps on different ways to say it. But I'm saying, even my wife kind of gets sick of me saying, so would you be opposed to us leaving at 6 o'clock? Right. And she's okay, I get it. Yes, we can go.
Yeah. Another one is, are you against? Is a great one. Are you against? Are you against, or simply, how bad of a position am I going to put you in if I ask for X?
Oh, that's a good one. How bad of a position am I going to put you in if I ask you for this? Oh, that's really good. I like that. That's awesome. Okay. So Derek, this is awesome. And I really want to respect your time and just say thank you again so much for time. Before we do, let me put up my little banner here for you. So everybody, I definitely want you to go and get Derek's book right now. You can go to Amazon or Audible. I got mine on Audible because everybody who listens to that podcast knows I listen to books all the time. I'm very much an auditory listener. But this book actually made me stop and take notes. And this is just my notes for the show, right? This is just my notes I have for the show. I have a ton of other notes that I'm going to be training and teaching a 6-hour class this Saturday or this Friday on sales to a corporation, that I'm going to incorporate some of these things in there because it just makes so much sense. And I just want to thank you so much for being a part of the show. As we do in tradition on this show, at the very end of the show, I have 6 questions that I ask every guest. Would it be okay if I do the rapid fire, asking you questions off then the first answer on top
fire? Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. When it comes to leadership, what do you think is the most expensive thing that leaders are missing in their businesses?
The most expensive thing?
Yes.
Tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy is the most expensive thing. Okay, what is
and here's why it's expensive.
Right?
It's costing you human capital. People are not leaving jobs; they're leaving bosses, and they're leaving bosses because they can't display the empathy.
What's the number one? There's a couple of studies actually show the number one reason why people leave their jobs is not feeling appreciated.
Yep.
Not feeling appreciated. Wow. What's a book? And of course, we want everybody to go get Ego, Authority, Failure. It's available. You guys go get it right now. But is there another book that you believe every leader should be reading without fail?
Leif Babin, Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership.
Oh, nice. You're a Jocko fan. Well, of course you're a Jocko fan. I'm a Jocko fan. He's awesome. That's great. Okay. In my book, my very first book it's called The Practice RX, and I focus a lot on team culture and team performance as the foundation for business growth. When you are talking with these business leaders, what do you see as their biggest challenge that they're facing with their teams and their office culture?
Lack of transparency, lack of inclusion.
Lack of transparency and lack of inclusion.
That's right. And not creating that environment where people think they have not only the right, but the responsibility to speak up. I didn't want, when I ran my hostage negotiations team, we would have timeouts during these hostage situations where we would get together and we talk about where we were, where we are, where we want to go. The time for me to learn that you have a problem with the direction that we're taking is not after the event is over, because it does us no good then. I created the environment where I wanted that input in the moment. And so that's where I think a lot of leaders are falling down now, is because they think that they have to be the smartest person in the room, or at least appear to be the smartest person in the room, which leads them to not soliciting information, advice, ideas from highly talented people.
Yeah, and they got a full cesspool, if you will, or let's say a swimming pool full of really great talent inside of their offices, and they're not listening.
Yep.
Next question is pretty simple. How can people get a hold of you if they wanted to reach out or find out more about you? I have the Black Swan Ltd down here.com. Is there another way that you would have? Are you on Facebook? Are you on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me, connection request, and as long as your profile doesn't look like you're a weirdo, I'll likely honor it.
Aw, that so makes me feel good. All right. Number 5 is, what's the best advice? And I know this is a difficult one, but what's the best advice you've ever received in life or in business?
I think I mentioned it earlier. Stick to your training.
Love it. So true.
Stick to your training.
Yeah, it's funny how like our egos really do. I had a mentor once used to say, the only thing that's going to screw this up is your better idea. Mm-hmm. And he would give us a formula on how to do stuff. And he would just stand up and say, you guys, stop trying to have a better idea. It works. Do it. It's the recipe for the cake you said you wanted. Do it the way it says. You'll get it.
That's right.
Okay. Last question. What's the best resource or tool? Doesn't have to do with expenses or anything. The best resource or tool that you think every business owner should use to grow their practice?
The best tool or resource to grow their practice. This is going to sound trite and cliche, but you mentioned it earlier, and it's investing in each member of the team.
Yes.
You want to grow your practice or business. You create that environment where people, we use that term buy-in, where people willingly will do anything that you ask them to do. Happy team, happy work life.
So true. So true. Geez, man, I can't believe this hour went by as fast as it did. Derek, I just want to thank you so much for first of all, thank you for writing a book. Like, I know sometimes you have, I know if you're anything like me, if there's a lot of people I talk to, sometimes you get they're like, well, who's going to read my book? And when you put it out there, it's like having your baby judged, right? It's like, here's
exactly.
Like, don't judge my baby too harshly, right? And so just thank you for writing the book. It really means a lot. I think it's very something that's going to help out so many people. It already has and will continue to do so. And it's a legacy that you're leaving far beyond your years on this planet. So I really, really appreciate that.
That's too kind. Thank you.
And then again, thank you for your hour being here. Everybody, I hope you had an amazing time being here. I hope you got a lot of information out of this. As always, our goal is to bring you the best practices possible for your company, and always to help you be more proactive, more productive, and more profitable in all areas of your life and business. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Dino. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks so much again for listening to the Propreneur Podcast. We really appreciate your support. If you haven't subscribed already, please make sure you do so. Also, if you feel like you might be a good fit for our podcast as a guest, or know somebody who you think would be, go ahead and email us at dino@dinowatt.com. Again, thanks for support. We'll see you on the next episode.